huddled in kind of the fetal position and shaking convulsively was her brother. And his leg had been mangled that day by the drone attack. And of course, they had no money to get him medical help. I think maybe he was withdrawing from opium, I'm not sure. But I am sure that with my eyes, I could see that this family's lives had been radically altered by drones that flew overhead, by drones that fired missiles. And it's in countries all around the world that this kind of antagonism and resentment and confusion happens. I know one mother whose son was graduated from the police academy. She was very proud, you know, the whole family thought, wow, you know, son was celebrating his graduation. He was sitting with 4 friends in a garden. And the widow, after a Hellfire missile killed all 5 young men, said to me, I never want to see this kind of carnage happen to anyone else ever again. But her mother-in-law, the mother of Adnan, who was killed, said, they do not ask, who was this, what was that? I went to ask authorities, why do you kill my son? And they said there were doubts, suspicions, and she knew. She was a very simple woman, most likely illiterate, but she knew you don't kill another person on a doubt or on a suspicion. And so there are other people in other lands who are sustaining our wars and for whom it's very, very difficult to explain, for instance, to the 5-year-old child and the young man who was killed, your father was killed by a computer. And what kind of a world are we moving into with the proliferation of roboticized warfare, with the reality that coming around the corner, in a sense, will be not only unmanned aerial vehicles, but vehicles that involve no piloting whatsoever. They'll just be completely autonomously directed by machines. So I was invited to go and speak at Whitewater campus of the University of Wisconsin, and the person who invited me sent me some questions to think about ahead of time. And one of her questions had to do with the word dystopia. She said, how can I talk with my students in a world of shrinking humanism about dystopian situations such as appear so often in literature and in film these days? It was a very interesting question, and I was pretty stymied. So I said to Buddy Bell, who's in his 30s and very energetic and resilient and thoughtful, I said, Buddy, how would you answer this? And Buddy went back to his room, came back, gave me a compact disc and said, listen to track 3. And I always do what Buddy says. So track 3 was Utah Phillips, a folk singer-songwriter. And I'm going to tell you the story that Utah Phillips told. I find it quite helpful. Utah Phillips was in Korea. He was a young soldier. And he was war-weary, and he was also, on a particular day, just covered with vermin, and his boots were rotted, and his feet smelled, and he had mold. He felt like the mold was growing on him, and he was desperate to clean up, and he was at the Imchan River, but there was a taboo. It was absolutely forbidden for soldiers from the United States to jump in the river and clean themselves off and take a swim. And Utah Phillips was frustrated. And he's telling this story to his son. His son had said, Dad, did you ever kill anybody when you were a soldier? And Utah Phillips had said, well, I'm not sure, but sit down and listen to this. So he tells his son this setting and says that on the other side of the river he could see Chinese soldiers who were having a blast. They were cleaning themselves up and swimming in the river, and so why can't he jump in the river? And finally a carpenter, a Korean carpenter who was working at the U.S. military base, came along, and he said, a child was born into our family today, but we already didn't have enough food for everybody in the family to have something to eat. So when that happens, one of our old people will take a jug of water and a blanket and go to the riverside, and we don't want you to swim in our river because our old people are floating out to sea. We don't want you to swim in our river because our old people are floating out to sea. The old people would sacrifice themselves knowing there wasn't enough food to go around when a newborn came into the family, and so the oldest person would basically go out. Extraordinary compassion and selflessness and courage in a time of great fear and horror, in a time of war. And I was really grateful that he gave me that story, and I felt that I need to try to absorb that. You know, here we are in a time when, following, for instance, September 11th, I think panic overtook the country, and ever since there's always been this sense of we were hurt, we were hit, not amongst this group here, but it does mark our climate. And I think that there's you know, again in President Obama's speech this past week, he said in every fiber of his being, he believes in U.S. exceptionalism. And I think that's dangerous. I think we'll never find security emphasizing to the whole world that we're the indispensable nation, that we're somehow above the fray when it comes to abiding by any kinds of agreements, that somehow we can continue to promote competitiveness, military competitiveness, and we don't have to ask ourselves questions about our nuclear weapons, like the questions we asked today outside of Bannister, that we don't have to ask ourselves questions like the questions we'll ask out in front of Whiteman Air Force Base, that we can imprison Chelsea Manning for years and years and years and punish people relentlessly, but we're always the good guys. Well, this isn't a secure, it's not a wise way to think. And so I want to tell you something that stopped me in my tracks, and that I think has to also be part of the mirror that we look into. Right now there are 1 million Afghan children suffering from severe acute malnourishment. If they survive, they'll almost certainly have brain damage. Because when you have severe acute malnourishment, with it comes IDD, iodine deficiency disorder. And the brain doesn't develop properly. The body is stunted. They'll be very vulnerable to, if they survive, various kinds of diseases all throughout their lives. 1 million children suffering from severe acute malnourishment. Repeatedly, mothers have come to me and told me, I think I'm going mad. I feel that I'm losing my mind. I think I'm going insane. I'm emotionally disturbed. Because they can't feed their children. Now, the good news would be that the cost to put iodine, iodized salt, into the diet of any one of those children who are at risk of dying from starvation, who need that salt, the cost would be 5 cents per child per year. Would many of us not want to make that 5 cents per child per year available? Now think about Lady Justice and the scales. The cost to keep 1 U.S. soldier in Afghanistan for the year 2014 will be $2.1 million per soldier per year. 5 cents? 2.1 million? What in the world are we spending $2.1 million on per soldier per year? Well, don't please think they're having filet mignon and lobster every night. This is where it gets to be even more crazed. In order to deliver truck-delivered supplies and also to take out of Afghanistan, in the greatest retrograde mission in history, according to the general who's in charge of it, the removal, to take out the supplies, the cost is so high because they pay a toll. You know how sometimes if you're driving on a tollway, you put Easy Pass in your window, they pay a toll not to the Afghan government, but to the warlords and the drug lords and the Taliban warlords and drug lords who run those roadways. Anatol even said in the New York Review of Books that it's fair to say the United States has subsidized the Taliban over all these years. Because for all those truck-delivered supplies, the U.S. has been paying a toll on every single truck, and if they don't pay, the trucks are parked and people torch them overnight.